I needed to find a way to save space in my small garage workshop, so I created the Middleweight Folding Workbench. This mid-sized workbench folds up easily against the wall when I don't need it, giving me valuable floor space to assemble furniture pieces, use power tools, play darts, or do anything else I want. It's small enough to not get in the way when I need to get things done, but has a large enough work surface for all of my needs. I can use this as a traditional workbench, an outfeed table, or an assembly table. Aside from the obvious benefit of having a really small footprint when it's folded up and out of the way, I really like the mobility, allowing me to move it around wherever I need it in my shop. It was a conscious decision not to put traditional lockable casters on these legs because I feel it makes for a wobbly workbench. When the casters I'm using are retracted, the 3" by 3.5" legs sit firmly on the ground, making for a really sturdy workbench. That, along with the lower support piece, the tabletop latches, and the diagonal cross brace, this has absolutely no wobble. This build uses minimal power tools, and the video plans consist of me building this without an existing workbench in case this is your first workbench build. Okay, let's get to building. Okay, one thing before you start. It's really important before you start building that you watch these entire video plans all the way through. Then go back to the beginning of the video and follow along as you build. I just want to make sure you don't miss anything as you're building that could cause a setback. So I already have my large tabletop piece and my small tabletop piece cut to their final dimensions. So now I'm cutting all the long tabletop support pieces and short tabletop support pieces to their final dimensions as laid out in the written plans. To cut these shorter tabletop support pieces to their final lengths, you can use a miter gauge on your table saw like you see here, or you can use your miter saw like you'll see in a few seconds. I'm adhering the tabletop support pieces to the underside of the large tabletop piece using wood glue and clamps. I'm letting these support pieces overhang about 1/16 of an inch, and I will cut these flush with a router and a flush trim bit. Because I can't get clamps to the middle, I'm using 3" construction screws and glue to adhere the middle piece. I'm just going to leave those screws in because they'll really never be seen. I made the support piece for the small tabletop piece a little bit wider so that I can cut it exactly flush with a flush trim bit and a router. It's now time to use a flush trim bit and a palm router to cut the support pieces flush with both tabletop pieces. To find out exactly how wide my hardwood edge banding needs to be, I'm first going to see exactly how thick my small tabletop piece is. Then I'll cut my hardwood edge banding to that exact size. It should be about 1.5 inches, but I like to use this little trick to see just exactly how wide it needs to be. Next, I'll see exactly how long these hardwood pieces need to be, and I'll cut them to their exact lengths on the miter saw. I'm using plenty of glue to attach these hardwood pieces, and since I don't have one clamp long enough, I'm doubling and even tripling up the clamps that I do have. I'm using the same method to adhere the hardwood border to the small tabletop piece, plenty of glue and plenty of clamps. I'm letting these tabletops dry overnight, but I can work on other steps while they're drying. These 8-foot 2x4s are a little tough to handle because they're so long, so I'm cutting them down to more manageable pieces with my jigsaw. You absolutely do not need to do this, but I'm planing both faces of all the 2x4s just to make them look a little nicer, and it will greatly decrease the amount of sanding I need to do. Now I'm using my miter saw and a stop block to cut all 6 leg pieces to their final dimensions. I absolutely recommend using a stop block so all the pieces can be the exact same lengths. I'm taking a 2x4 and cutting 4 pieces that are 7 inches long each. I'll glue each piece to the bottom of a table leg, so in the end, I'll have 4 table legs with a 7-inch piece glued at the bottom of each. Next, I'm cutting the 2 lower leg support pieces and 2 upper leg support pieces to their final dimensions, and I decided to get my arm in the way of this shot because I thought that would be a lot of fun. I'm measuring where I need to cut out the notch on the lower leg support pieces, and I'm raising the blade to be about half the width of each piece. I'm just going to take multiple passes using my single table saw blade, and for the first cut I'm using a stop block so this cut can be in the exact same spot on each piece. I'm not showing it here, but as I creep up to the exact width that this notch is going to be, I'm using the 2x4 that's going to fit in here to make sure I'm getting the exact width that I need. And in the end, it looks like a pretty good fit. You want it snug, but you don't want it so tight that you have trouble getting it in or out. To cut the long additional leg piece to the perfect length, I'm going to use referential measurements. I'm putting the upper leg support piece flush with the top of the leg, and then I'm making a mark. Then I'm putting my lower leg support piece in place and marking exactly where I need to cut the long additional leg piece on the miter saw. I'm only showing one miter saw cut here, but I actually had to sneak up on this cut a few times to get the exact length I needed. Now I'm just using glue and clamps to secure this long additional leg piece in place. I'm marking where I need to drill the holes for the upper leg support piece and lower leg support piece, and these holes will be 3/4 of an inch away from each edge. I'm using glue and recessed 2-inch screws to attach these pieces to the legs, and I'm recessing each screw 1/2 inch. I'm not going to recess 2 of the screws on each leg assembly quite as deep. I'm only going to recess those maybe about 1/8 inch. That is because I don't need to hide those screws with dowels because they will not be visible at all. I'll show you in a minute exactly which screws you do not need to recess or plug with dowels. I'm using glue and 3/8 inch dowels to plug these holes to hide the screws, and I'm using oak dowels just because I think it will be a nice contrast. But you can use whatever dowels you want to hide these screws. Okay, here are the screws that you do not need to cover with dowels. On this leg assembly, you can leave the top left screws exposed. And on this one, you can leave the screws in the top right corner exposed. In a future step, we're going to cover both of these little sections with a block of wood from a 2x4. I cut 2 pieces of construction lumber to 58 inches first, and I'm putting one of them against the 2 remaining 33.5 inch long pieces. Then I put the small tabletop piece right up against them to see exactly how long these 2 pieces need to be. Then I'm cutting both pieces at the exact same time on the miter saw, and it turns out that these 2 pieces are right about 57 inches, but measuring them against the small tabletop piece and the 2 33.5 inch pieces ensures you'll get the exact length you need for both of these pieces. I'm drilling 2 pocket holes on each side of these roughly 57 inch pieces, and then I'm attaching them to the 33.5 inch pieces using pocket hole screws and glue. If you're using 2x4s like I am, make sure you use 2.5 inch long pocket hole screws. To finish up this leg base, I am marking exactly where I need to cut the diagonal cross brace, and then I'm cutting it on the miter saw. It doesn't matter exactly what angle you cut these at on the miter saw, just line up the blade with the marks you made on this diagonal cross brace. And you should not have to adjust the angle when you cut the other side of this piece. It should be the exact same angle on both sides. I'm just using 2 screws on each side to attach this diagonal cross brace. You can use glue as well, but I didn't think it was needed. I'm clamping the leg assemblies to the workbench base and then installing the hinges. I'm using 1 long screw on each hinge, and then the other 2 holes I'm just using the shorter screws. When you're attaching these hinges, make sure the very top of the hinge is below this wooden piece here. When I first attached this hinge, the top part was slightly above this wooden piece here, so I had to reattach it so it was below, and you can double check by sliding a piece of wood and making sure that this piece of wood does not catch on the hinge. Let's put together some retractable workbench casters. If you've bought the exact set that I've put in the plans, you should have 4 components that make up the casters, including the wheel, 2 bolts, one slightly longer than the other, 3 nuts, and this big one will be for the wheel, and then 2 tools to put it all together. You'll have 4 of these sets to make up the 4 casters. Now we're not going to worry about the wheel just yet. We'll put that off to the side and we'll attach that after we screw in the caster base to the actual workbench leg. First I'll take this base piece. This is the piece that will screw in to the actual workbench leg, and then I'm going to use the longer screw to attach the silver piece to the bottom of this base piece, kind of where it slants down. Now when you're attaching the silver piece, make sure the 2 side walls are going up like this when you attach it, and they're not pointing down like this. Now I'll take the pedal and attach it like this with the ridges facing up using the slightly shorter bolt. And I'll secure it using the small nut. I'm installing the retractable casters on the workbench legs. The last time I bought these casters, it came with a template which helped install these. And this time, for some reason, it did not come with the template, but I'll walk you through it. The main thing is just making sure the bottom edge of the part you're screwing into the leg is 1 7/8 above the very, very bottom of the leg. I'm securing that part first, and then I'm putting on the wheel. I'm securing one latch block to the upper left-hand corner of each leg assembly, just using glue and one clamp. I am here from the future, and there's something you need to do before you route out the slots for the hinges. Okay, these tabletop pieces are upside down, obviously, and we have the underside of the big tabletop piece and the smaller tabletop piece. And what happened when I installed the hinges is the tabletop was not able to fold all the way. So I had to use a chamfer bit and my router to route out the corners of the underside of the table, as you can see here. But it would be a lot easier to do that before you install the hinges. Okay, here's a little visual of the tabletop pieces. We have the small tabletop piece and the large tabletop piece, and I've routed out a chamfer on the edge of each piece where they come together. And again, make sure you do this before you route out these slots for the hinges. It'll make your life much, much easier. And the chamfer I made was about 1/4 inch wide with a 45-degree chamfer bit. I was all done building the workbench, and then when I tried to fold it up, the tabletop wouldn't fold all the way because these tabletop latches got in the way. So now that you're about to route out the area for the hinges, route out an area 1.5 inches to the left and 1.5 inches to the right of the middle hinge. This will be the exact same depth as the hinge depth, and it will give the latches some place to go when you fold up your workbench. And you only need to do this next to the middle hinge. I'm marking where each hinge will go before I use a 1/2 inch router bit to route out some recesses for each hinge. I'm making these recesses oversized so that when I align the small tabletop piece and the large tabletop piece, it's not a tight fit. There's some wiggle room to make sure alignment goes smoothly. I'm using the router and the 1/2 inch straight cut bit to recess these about 1/2 inch deep. I'm freehanding the side of the recesses, but I clamped a scrap piece of plywood to make sure I get a straight line in the back. You can use scrap pieces to guide your entire cut for these recesses, but these don't need to be perfectly straight lines because you won't see these at all, as they'll be on the underside of your tabletop pieces. I'm using original Gorilla Glue and the screws that the hinges came with to secure the hinges to the underside of just the small tabletop piece only, not the large tabletop piece yet. Then I'll use wood glue and construction screws to attach the small tabletop piece to the workbench base. I'm sanding down the edges of the tabletop so they're not sharp to the touch, and then I'm giving the tabletop a quick sanding before I put on some finish. You don't need to put finish on your tabletop, but I am just because it adds a little bit of protection against liquids and it makes it look really nice. I'm just using General Finishes Armor Seal and I'll use 2 coats. If you are going to use finish, make sure you do it now before you install the tabletop latches. I'm attaching 2 latches, 1 on each side of the workbench, and these will secure the tabletop to the folding legs. Also, make sure you attach these latches in the exact center, left to right, of the latch block. The last thing I need to do for this workbench is install the lower support stretcher. I'm first measuring exactly how long this needs to be and then cutting it to size. Then I'm putting it in the notches I made on both legs and marking exactly where I need to remove material. Then I'm just cutting to the line with a handsaw. You can use a jigsaw if you have one, but either way works well. Yes, you are finished, congratulations, but this next part is probably the most important part of the whole video. How to safely fold up the workbench and unfold it. Because if you don't fold it up or unfold it properly, the workbench could fall, harming the workbench and potentially harming yourself. First thing, roll it up against the wall so the back of the workbench is touching the wall. Then retract the back wheels so that the back legs are touching the ground. Keep the front wheels out, take out the lower support stretcher, then unlatch 1 tabletop latch and fold that leg in. Then unlatch the other tabletop latch and fold the second leg in. Then slowly drop the workbench tabletop. After you've dropped the tabletop and the workbench is folded, keep the wheels that are in front engaged. Do not retract them or the workbench will tilt forward, leaving it in kind of a precarious position and it's not very sturdy. Then to unfold the workbench, you just do all of this in reverse. Unfold 1 leg and latch it, unfold the other leg and latch that one, and then put in the lower support stretcher. And never ever try and move the workbench when it's folded, only move it when it's unfolded like this. Hey, really great job finishing this build, and you will enjoy this for many years to come. Until next time.